Hi everybody, and welcome to episode number 3 of our second season in The Road to Somewhere. And this particular episode I'm going to call a love story, and I'll explain that to you a little bit later on here in our time together. Just a quick reminder for those of you that might be jumping in here maybe for the first time or early. We're following the story that's in my book, The Road to Somewhere, and it involves a couple named John Calvin and Joy Jardine, who have been hired to travel Route 66 and film a series of 66 short videos that go with a series of lectures on each book of the Bible. And what my objective was in writing the book actually was to try and figure out a story that somehow, as someone was reading it, might encourage them to go and watch those videos. Each one gives an overview of one book of the Bible, and it corresponds to a stop on Route 66. And so where we are, we have entered into season 2, which is actually the second segment of the road, which takes place in the state of Missouri. And in that state, we're going to be making 12 stops, 6 in part 1, and then a little break over the Easter season. And then we'll come back and do another 6 after that. So quickly, again, in our last episode together, Joy and John had been in a city that no longer existed called Times Beach, just outside of St. Louis. And at the end of that time, they hop in their Corvette convertible and head down the road just a little bit to Sullivan, Missouri. I might say that along the way, they go by Stanton, Missouri, and Stanton, Missouri is the place where there's really a pretty famous caverns there called Merrimack Caverns. It's quite huge, and it's a big tourist attraction, and actually most people that are traveling down Route 66 would probably make a stop here. It's an amazing natural wonder. It also has kind of an interesting history behind it, because during the time that Jesse James and his gang were outlaws, they actually used to hide out here in Merrimack Caverns. So that's sort of one little historical piece. But another one that I think is kind of humorous is that supposedly it was here at Merrimack Caverns that the bumper sticker was invented. And supposedly, as people would be inside on a tour of the caverns, the company would send out employees and stick these bumper stickers on every car in the parking lot. And so supposedly that's the origin of the bumper sticker. So we're not really stopping there, driving by it, because we're heading on down the road just a little bit to Sullivan, Missouri. I did want to say just a word, by the way, about the relationship between Joy and John, because so far we haven't talked a lot about it. And even though this particular episode I'm calling a love story, it's not about them, but the actual storyline of the book itself. They develop a relationship, and there are some fun pieces to that are coming up as we move down the line. So far, we really haven't seen much about their interaction. Both have shared a little bit of background. And of course, one of the big pieces of the story is that John Calvin, who was the main character in the prequel to this book, Somewhere Fast, actually was an ordained Presbyterian minister. He really knows the Bible quite well, but due to some circumstances that we will look at a little bit later on in the story, he has left the ministry He has gone back to get his PhD in psychology and is teaching psychology at a small community college. And as far as Joy knows, that's who he is. So he's been keeping from her really his backstory and acting as if he really doesn't know the Bible very well. So there's many times along the road early that when they stop, he indicates to her that he needs to sort of brush up or study up on whatever book it is that he'll be giving a little teaser to in their video. And he begins to feel bad about that. He really wants to tell her his whole story. And at this point in time, he's still hesitant. He doesn't know what she'll make of that. But a mutual attraction begins to develop between the two of them. And we will look at much more of that as we move along. But today we're in Sullivan. And you might ask the question, well, why Sullivan? And the key to Sullivan, a little bit humorous perhaps, are fire hydrants. And Sullivan is a town, like many towns along Old Route 66, that is taking advantage of the what you might think of as a Route 66 revival and are doing things to attract tourists to stop in their town. They have roughly about 60 fire hydrants, I think it is, in Sullivan. And at some point in time, a few years back, somebody came up with the idea that they should, get local artists and assign them a fire hydrant and let them paint it artistically. And out of those 60 fire hydrants, there's approximately 30 of them that were painted with Route 66 themes. So even some of the places that we've stopped at already along the way are portrayed in some of these fire hydrants. So they arrive in Sullivan, and again, they begin to drive around town just trying to figure out where they want to shoot their video and looking for just the right fire hydrant. And they find one that has the Route 66 logo on it. It has Maryland on one side of it, and actually the second fire hydrant from the left in the slide that you saw, you can see Maryland, and on the other side, I believe, is Elvis. And they decide, well, this would be a great place because of the content that's on that fire hydrant that they would shoot their video. So it's a pretty quick stop, by the way. John gives a little bit of info both in the book and in the video that they shoot about this background about the fire hydrants and a little bit about Route 66 and how those tie in. Then, as happens in each of these stops, he transitions over to one of the books of the Bible to give a teaser, hoping that people will then go to watch the actual longer teaching on the book that's contained in those links that you have, by the way. It's the second link that would take you there, and the particular book that is connected to this stop in Sullivan is the book of Ruth. Sometimes the books have some sort of a connection to the stop. So for instance, last week when we looked at Times Beach, our theme was disasters, and Times Beach was a city that had experienced a disaster to the extent that it no longer existed. And then our biblical book that tied into that was the book of Judges, which again is a book that just is filled with disaster. It gives, again, about 400 years of Israel's history and cycle after cycle of how the nation kept drifting away from their faith and getting caught up in the faith of the Canaanites, and as a result of that, God would allow them to be defeated by some enemy that surrounded the country for some period of time until there was repentance in Israel, and then God would restore them. Now, it's interesting because Ruth is a book that actually takes place during that period of time. What we don't know is when. The text in verse 1 simply tells us that it was during this period of the Judges that this story takes place. So it might have been anywhere along that 400-year period. And I think it's a love story. Now, it has a little bit of disaster in it that's part of the story, but ultimately it's a love story. It's a very short little book. It's very easy to read. It's only 4 chapters, and yet it really does contain a lot of drama. I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about it than I normally might, because this is a little more than John actually tells his audience in the video. But the setting is that there's actually a famine in Israel. And you have to wonder if perhaps that isn't part of one of those cycles of repression because when these foreign invaders would come in and conquer Israel, oftentimes they would either steal all of their crops or destroy their crops, which would have created famine. And at this point in time, as the story opens up, there is a famine going on there in Israel. And then we're introduced to some of the characters in the story. We're introduced to a Jewish man by the name of Elimelech, and he has a wife by the name of Naomi, and they have 2 sons. And in response to the famine, they decide that they are going to make, and it's funny because the text says that they are going to go for a short time over to Moab. I think I've got, Ruth, let me get over here. Let me just show you. So they're in Bethlehem, which actually is an important part of the story. You don't really know that initially as you're reading it, but from Bethlehem, they're going to come over here to the region of Moab, and we're not really told specifically where. Moab would be part of modern-day Jordan, and generally speaking, the Moabites and the Israelites really didn't get along well, but this is where they go because there's food in Moab. And so, again, Elimelech, Naomi, and their 2 sons head over there. The first kind of difficult thing that happens in the story is that we're told that Elimelech dies while they're there in Moab, and so Naomi becomes a widow. And of course, that's a difficult experience for her. The text goes on to say, and this is where it's funny because it initially said they went there for a short time, but then we're told that after 10 years there in Moab, that 2 things happen. Number 1, that her sons, both of her sons, marry, and they marry Moabite women, which, by the way, was forbidden in the law, but in this story, that's what happens. The 2 women's names are Orpah and Ruth. Now, I've got to just distract for a second because when you read the name Orpah or you see it, what might come to your mind is, well, gee, if you just transpose two of those letters, you would have Oprah instead of Orpah. And I've been told, and whether this is accurate or not, is that our famous Oprah's real name is Orpah, and on her birth certificate it says Orpah. But at some point in time, and maybe just because they didn't like the sound of Orpah or somebody mispronounced her name and it stuck, she became Oprah. So anyway, there's two Moabite women, and the two sons of Naomi marry them. This is important for Naomi, by the way, because although this isn't part of the story exactly, if you knew much about Jewish culture, you'd know that as a widow, there was a great concern in terms of how she would even be provided for. But in her case, she has two adult sons who marry. And so, she's in a relatively good position at that point in time. Then we're told that the two sons die somewhere around after living there in Moab for 10 years. And so now Naomi has not only lost her husband, she's lost her two sons also. By the way, let me just again go on a tangent for a second, but in terms of preparing each week to give you this little introduction to the longer video, I usually go back and watch the longer video to make sure all is well with it, but also to see what I need to tie in terms of our little video here. And I noticed that one of the things that I think is important in watching the video on Ruth is that I go into a bit of a discourse on why does God allow suffering, which is one of the great both theological, philosophical problems. Is there a purpose to our pain and difficulty in life? And I try to give some insights on that. There actually there's a purpose that this disaster in Naomi's life plays. We get to see the immediate result of it where there is a positive outcome. But we also get to see a little bit in the book of what I think is the much bigger picture of how even pain and difficulty and loss, the things that make life hard, can play a significant part in the larger plan of whatever it is that that God is has purposed for the entire universe, and we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this session together. So the sons have died, and again, it's a very difficult time for Naomi. Word comes that the famine is over in Israel. So if you kind of plug that back into the book of Judges, it might be that this was a period of time where Israel kind of got back on track with their relationship with God, and God has now blessed their crops, and so there's food in Israel. And Naomi decides that she is going to head back to her home in Bethlehem in the land of Judah. And she encourages her two daughters-in-law that they should stay in Moab because there is no way that there's someone in the immediate family line. Naomi can't really provide them with husbands, and that they should stay in Moab and find a husband and get married and live their life there. Orpah decides that's what she's going to do. She stays, but Ruth decides to go with Naomi. I think this is kind of a part of the love story. It's a different kind of a love, of course. But Ruth cares so much for Naomi that she wants to stay with her. And there's actually probably the classic line in the book that comes at this point in time in that decision, where Ruth says to Naomi, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. And then this text, where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Now, they head back, and they come to Bethlehem, and Naomi tells her former friends and neighbors how bitter her life has been, because things look pretty bleak. And even though there is food in Israel, Naomi and Ruth would be extremely poor. And consequently, as they arrive back, they come at harvest season. And Jewish culture, and what you might think of as the economics of the Bible, had some interesting ways of providing for the poor. One of those was that when someone would harvest their crop, they were instructed not to harvest all of it, to leave a bit behind, and that then those that were poor were allowed to come into the field and could glean what was left over, and that would provide food for them. And so the decision is made that Ruth should go and glean in a field in order to provide for her and Naomi. And Ruth ends up going to work in the field of a family relative by the name of Boaz. And this is where the love story really starts. I decided that rather than telling you about the love story between Ruth and Boaz, that I'm going to let you go and watch the Ruth video, because it's really an interesting story of how the two of them connect. And I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler, and that is that Ruth and Boaz do end up getting married. And then what we're told, and this is how the book sort of closes out, is they have a child and a son, and his name is Obed. And Obed, when he grows up and gets married, has a child, and his name is Jesse. And Jesse, when he grows up and gets married, actually has 7 sons. One of them is named David. And of course, David will become the king of Israel, and we're going to see about his life in a couple of weeks. But think about this, 1,000 years later, the descendants of David, who again can trace their roots back to Bethlehem, end up having a child, and his name is Jesus. So this whole story, in the context of who Jesus is and his lineage, goes all the way back to what at first looks like an absolute disaster, difficulty in the life of Naomi, that ends up driving her to Moab, foreign country, ends up with a daughter-in-law who is a Moabitess named Ruth, and Ruth then ends up coming back to Bethlehem, marrying Boaz, and all of that becomes part of the line of Jesus. It's really a great story, and in the book then, John, giving just a little bit of a piece of that story, encourages his viewers to then go to the link that appears there. It's in your email, and to watch the video on the book of Ruth, and that's what, of course, I'm encouraging you to do. So that really kind of wraps up our time here in Sullivan, Missouri. And at the end of that, John and Joy head back down the road, and next week in episode 4, we're going to Cuba, Missouri, not that other Cuba. And we will continue on the road to somewhere. So thanks for joining us today. Again, I really encourage you to watch the Ruth video, and you have the link to that, and we'll see you next week.